Okay. We're on chapter 18, page 205, Buried Treasure. Now remember that Tom and Huck really wanted to follow Injun Joe and his friend around because they had money. So they said that they were going to hide the money. Where was it? Hold on. Okay. Injun Joe and his partner said they were going to hide the treasure, the money, under number 2, or hidden at number 2 under the cross. And Tom and Huck are trying to figure out what that means, but they don't know yet. And we know that Huck watched over the tavern that Injun Joe was at, followed Injun Joe and his partner, heard that they were going to hurt Widow Douglas, and he ran and got Mr. Who was it? Mr. Welsh? Is that what his name was? Sorry. Yeah, Mr. Welsh. And Mr. Welsh and his sons went to go get Injun Joe. The partner and Injun Joe ran off. They weren't able to get them. But the partner died. He drowned in the river. So Injun Joe was in the cave, remember? And Mr. Thatcher just said that they had sealed up the cave. And Tom was like, Injun Joe was in the cave. So we're going to find out what happened. Buried treasure. Within minutes, the news had spread around town and dozens of men were on their way to the cave with Tom and Mr. Thatcher. When the cave door was unlocked, a sorrowful sight presented itself. A really sad sight was there in the dim twilight. Injun Joe lay stretched upon the ground, dead, his face close to the crack of the door. It seemed as if his last moments had been spent searching for light and cheer from the outside world. Injun Joe's dead because he was locked in the cave. Oh my gosh. Tom was touched. So touched means like he felt something for Injun Joe. He felt bad for Injun Joe probably. For he knew through his own experience how this man must have suffered. Because Tom was in there and he was, he would have died, right? He didn't have food or water, and Injun Joe was the same. Oh my goodness. Tom felt pity, but even more, he felt an incredible sense of relief and security. Injun Joe was dead. No longer would Tom's dreams be haunted by thoughts of Injun Joe's revenge. So he felt really bad for Injun Joe, but he also felt relief because he's like, well, now I know he's not going to try and kill me. I know that he's gone and he can't hurt me. No longer would he tiptoe around wondering when the man would seek him out for having saved Muff Potter's life. Because he was scared for his life, but now he doesn't have to worry. Injun Joe's Bowie knife lay close by. Its blade was broken in 2 from Injun Joe's unsuccessful attempts at chipping and hacking at the door which blocked the cave exit. So you can see from the picture that there's a knife and it's broken because Injun Joe was trying to he was trying to break up the rock that was now the door of the cave, and he was trying to get out. Man, that's sad, guys. Ordinarily, one could find dozens of bits of candles left by the tourists in the crevices of this path, but now there were none. So you know when you have a candle, it drips wax, right? So it's saying that usually there were bits of candles left by, or I'm sorry. There's the wax that the candle drips, but there's also you know how every candle, there's always just a little bit left and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't use it or anything. so people would leave those bits of the candles behind. It says that there used to be a bunch of those in the cave, but now there were none. Injun Joe must have searched them out and eaten them. So he was trying to survive, so he was eating the candles. He had probably also caught a few bats and had eaten them too, leaving only their claws. The man had starved to death. Okay, I don't know what a bat is in Spanish, but a bat is something that lives in a cave and has wings. And it's saying that they found just the claws of the bat. So Injun Joe had tried to find bats and eaten them, and he had starved to death. Oh my gosh. The men in the search party buried Injun Joe near the mouth of the cave. People flocked there in boats and wagons from the towns, villages, and farms for miles around. They brought their children and all sorts of food, making it more of a picnic than a funeral. That's interesting. So they didn't really feel bad about Injun Joe, I guess. The morning after the funeral, Tom and Huck went to their secret place on the hill to have an important talk. Huck had learned all about Tom's adventure from Mr. Welsh and the widow Douglas, and now Huck wanted to explain to Tom all that had happened to him. I was standing watch outside the tavern, Tom, just like we agreed, and I followed Injun Joe and his partner when they left. I overheard their terrible plans for the widow Douglas, so I ran to Mr. Welsh and begged him to save her. That was great, Huck, said Tom, but why didn't you want anyone to know how brave you were? Because even though the widow Douglas was saved, Injun Joe had escaped. Because remember, Huck didn't want anybody to know that he had told the Welsh family about the widow Douglas. He's like, don't tell anyone, and he ran off. And he's saying that he did that because he's like, Injun Joe had escaped. If they had known that I was the one that told about this, then Injun Joe would have even more reason to hurt him and kill him. Tom nodded. He understood exactly how Huck had felt. But that was done, and Tom wanted to discuss the subject that had been on his mind for weeks. The treasure. Huck, he said, that money was never in room number 2 at the tavern. What? Huck searched his friend's face for some sort of clue. Tom, have you got on the track of that money again? Huck, it's in the cave. Huck's eyes blazed. Say it again, Tom, he cried. The money's in the cave. Tom, are you serious? Do you promise you aren't kidding about this? I'm serious, Huck. Will you go in the cave with me and help get it out? You bet I will. That is, I will if we can do it without getting lost. Huck, we can do it without the least little bit of trouble. I promise you that. We'll need some bread and meat, a few strong bags, and 3 balls of kite string. Also, plenty of matches. The boys gathered their supplies, and a little after noon they got underway. So, Tom wants to go back into the cave, which, oh my gosh, he's crazy. But he's trying to be more prepared, so they got some things to take in the cave so to make sure they don't get lost. When they were close to the opposite shore of the river, Tom pointed high up on the hillside and said, Now you see this bluff? It looks like all the others, but there's a small white mark up there. See it, Huck? That's one of my marks. We'll get ashore now. The boys pulled the raft on shore, and Tom showed Huck the tiny cave opening hidden behind a thick clump of bushes. Huck was impressed. The hole would have been impossible to find without Tom. So Tom knew, because remember, the cave is all closed because they probably reclosed it after they found Injun Joe. And Tom knows how to get into the cave because he got out of the cave through a small hole. So they're going to go through the same small hole that Tom used to get out. They climbed through the hole and entered the cave. Tom took the lead, and they made their way to the far end of the tunnel. As they passed this spring, so that's the water, the little river, Tom felt a shudder go through him. He showed Huck the fragment of candle wick perched on a lump of clay against the wall, and he described how he and Becky had sat there watching the flames struggle and die. So he's remembering what it was like in the cave, and they just passed a spot where he and Becky were. And there's still the last bit of the candle that they had been using. And they had watched the flame die, like go away. The boys continued on through another corridor, talking only in whispers until they reached the ledge. Then Tom raised his candle high in the air and tugged at Huck's sleeve. "Now I'll show you something," said Tom. "Look as far around the corner as you can. Do you see that? There on the big rock, written with ashes." "Tom, it's a cross." "Now where's your number 2? Under the cross, right?" Huck stared at the cross a while, then said with a shaky voice, "Tom, let's get out of here." But Tom was the cool voice of reason. He slowly explained to Huck that there were no ghosts in the cave. Oh, he was worried about Injun Joe's ghost. So you can see that they see the cross right there. So apparently Tom saw this as he was getting out of the cave. Oh no, how did he see it? Oh no, because they passed where he and Becky had the candle. So yeah, he had seen it. "Injun Joe is dead," he reminded Huck, "and we've both suffered enough looking for the treasure. Now that we're so close, it's silly to be afraid." Tom managed to convince Huck that the treasure was rightfully theirs. At the base of a rock, they saw signs of activity. A blanket, some tools, and a piece of bacon rind, but no metal treasure chest. So they found evidence of somebody being there at some point, probably Injun Joe. "He said under the cross," whispered Huck. "Well, this comes nearest to being under the cross. It can't be under the rock itself because that sets on solid clay ground." They searched everywhere around the rock, then sat down discouraged. Huck had no ideas, but Tom was thinking and planning all the while he sat. "Look here, Huck. There's footprints and some candle grease on the clay on one side of this rock, but not on the other sides. Now what's that for? I bet you the money is under the rock." So Huck was like, "It's not under the rock because the rock is stuck. It's like in the ground." But now Tom is like, I think it might be under the rock. "I'm going to dig in the clay." They both began to scratch and dig, and after 2 hours, they uncovered some boards. Once the boards were removed, they discovered a whole new corridor which led under the rock. So they were going to go down, like into the earth, and there was like a passageway underneath the ground. Holy cow. They followed the path until it turned a curve. Tom stopped suddenly and exclaimed, "Huck, I found it! Here's the treasure!" It was the treasure box, sure enough. Tom lifted the lid and Huck scooped up the tarnished coins with his clay-filled hands. They found the treasure, guys. "We're rich, Tom, we really are." For a few moments, the boys just stood and looked at their treasure. Soon, they began to put the money into the bags and carrying it out of the cave. When they emerged from the cave into the clump of bushes, they looked around to make sure all was clear, to make sure nobody was there. Oh my gosh, guys. After a short rest for lunch, the boys loaded their raft and pushed out into the river. The sun was dipping towards the horizon as they left the shore, and by the time they landed, it was already dark. "Now, Huck," said Tom, "we'll hide the money in the loft of the widow's woodshed. I'll come up in the morning and we'll count it and divide it. Then we'll hunt up a place out in the woods for where it will be safe. So they'll find a safe place to put all the money. But for now, you just lay quiet here and watch the stuff while I run and find a wagon. I'll be gone only a minute. This is a little wagon in the picture. So he wanted to get the wagon to put the money in so it was easy to take the money over to the widow's woodshed. So a woodshed is where they keep their wood. Simple as that. Tom disappeared, but soon returned with the wagon. They put the sacks of money into it and started off, dragging their treasure behind them. As the boys passed Mr. Welsh's house, the old man stepped out and called, "Is that you, Huck? And you, Tom? Come along with me. Everyone is waiting." Mr. Welsh helped them pull the wagon a short ways down the road, and they parked it outside the widow Douglas's house. There was a party going on inside. The Thatchers, remember that's Becky's parents, the Harpers, that's Joe's parents, Aunt Polly, and just about everybody of importance was there. The widow greeted the boys as heartily, so as happily, as anyone could greet two ragged, dirty-looking young men who were covered with clay and candle grease from their latest adventure. Aunt Polly blushed and frowned, then shook her head at Tom. She was ashamed. But before she had a chance to say a word, Mr. Welsh began explaining how he had stumbled on Tom and Huck right at his door. "So I just brought them along." "And you did right," said the widow. "Come with me, boys." She took Tom and Huck to a bedroom and added, "Now wash and dress yourselves. Here are 2 new suits of clothes with shirts and socks and everything you'll need. We'll wait for you downstairs. Come down when you're ready." So she's wanting them to get all dressed and look nice. We don't know why. We'll find out. Oh, that's the end of the chapter. Okay. So, anything interesting about that for Tom and Huck? Maybe that they find treasure. That makes them interesting. Both of them. Okay? All right. Don't forget to write that down.